Hey everybody, I'm Agree,
I'm Harrison.
and this is Bottom Line Design. And today we are back with a round two with Darian Edwards. So thank you, Darian, for coming on the show.
Yeah, no problem. No problem. Thanks for having me.
Of course. And for the people who weren't here for round one, do you want to fill them in on what's your backstory, kind of like your claims to fame? Because you've got a few.
Yeah. I guess what the kind of catapulted my career was Mailbox. I was the founding designer of the Mailbox app. Spent a little bit of time at Dropbox, and then moved on to be a senior digital product designer at Nike and designed the Nike sneakers app. So I was the founding designer of that as well. And we never imagined that would be such a big hit, especially in the culture. But yeah, I spent quite a bit of time at Nike and touched a little bit almost every app in the Nike portfolio, from the Nike app to the Nike Run Club and Nike Training Club app as well.
Oh,
And I guess addition to that, I spent a lot of time over the years working with early stage startups and touched everything from Glimpse, if people remember that, One True Fan, which was pretty popular app, and yeah, I've been around.
So largely very unimpressive projects.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So let's just start from the beginning. So with Mailbox, there's a few things here like, Agree and I are definitely under the assumption that you definitely created or introduced with Matt like Flying Colors, you definitely introduced like the swipe to action. Like I think
Yeah.
that, we'd love to hear a little about that. In addition to what was it like working with that founding team?
Yeah. Oh, it was amazing. It was amazing. We had a very small team. At the time, our design team was myself, Gentry Underwood, who was the founder and CEO, and then El Luna came and joined us. And El and Gentry worked together for quite a bit of time at IDEO. And so they brought this really amazing design process to startups, right? And, at IDEO, it's mostly, long-term kind of agency engagements, but we were able to do it in a very small knit with our team. And so there's, always a ton of sketching. We did paper prototyping, which is how we, kind of figured out the swipes. We literally would have stickies and pieces of paper and, draw things with, colored pencils, and we would play around with interactions and the actions of, the app. And so it was where I say I really learned the sport of design
Mm.
and really fell in love with uh, that process of just like iterating and I think one thing that we discovered early on is that um, design is kind of meant to be messy and it's meant to be um, loud and very kind of like loose and it's almost in a way the opposite of what our engineering team was doing, right? They were figuring out some really complex cloud things, um and how to architect a system that can handle almost real-time communication and dealing with lots and lots of data when you're downloading someone's inbox that could be, I don't know, hundreds of thousands of messages. And so they're trying to figure out large amounts of data and want clear, roadmap and what we're doing. And we're on the other hand, just like, literally throwing stuff in the air. And so it was fun. It was really fun. And we would, we would look at so many different options and explore every angle as possible and really obsess the user and think about how they were going to feel more than anything. And I think one of my biggest takeaways is to design great products, you have to think about, who's it for, and what problems do they have, and how are you solving those problems, and that sounds cliche, but it's easy to forget, and it's easy to get away from that. And I feel like a lot of times, um, founders, especially first time founders, uh, they'll kind of obsess on their own problems and their own
Sure.
issues, but that doesn't always equal, customers or mass markets. And so, um, it's all about focusing on those users and thinking about, like, even like who are the extreme archetypes. And so that was a lot of what we did at Mailbox.
How did you take us through two things? One, like that process that Gentry and like the IDEO squad was kind of like a proponent of, and then how did you stay close to your users once you got started?
Yeah. So before we launched, we would invite people to our office, or, at the time we were in Palo Alto, and we were actually working like across the street from where the first Facebook office was. And so we would take day trips to San Francisco, and we would schedule meetings with, people who we would think would be these like extreme archetype kind of users. And so for us, there are people like, you know, uh, MG Siegler, who he's the guy from Google Ventures, and, very busy guy, and was very vocal during those times about, email and the fact that it sucks. And so we would go meet with him, and we would give him a preview into what we were building. We would show him mock-ups. We would ask him how he uses his inbox and how he triaged. And we would do the same with like even like our team. We would ask
Hmm.
everyone in the office to print out their emails and, manually show us how they triage messages, and um, all of that started to inform, what we would build, right? And it also informed, like I said, the emotional connection that people had with email, and it was a very similar process that I ended up taking with me to Nike, and when I was working on the Nike sneakers app, and thinking about, the sneakerheads in that community, and kind of what they were dealing with.
So can you tell a little bit more then about that messy process that goes from like the first hunch that you have of what the mailbox app could be or what the Nike sneakers app could be, and what is it about the process of observing these extreme personalities or personas that you're trying to design for? What gets uncovered in that process that isn't obvious when you first go in?
Uh, I think, I don't know. I guess like a lot of perspective, a lot of inspiration. I think, at least for me, like, I love building things for people, and and whether that's like a digital thing, I make t-shirts a lot for fun. I make a lot of stuff, and it's always for someone, right? And you want them to feel something. And I think, at the core of art or graphic design is just like human connection, and in that kind of like feeling. And so I think for me, you get that emotional connection that you're going to impact someone's life. And I think that's like an ultimate inspiration to like keep going. And then it's like also an ultimate inspiration to like make it good, right? Because you're like, yo, if it's gonna be good, they're gonna, be this much more delighted, or if it's gonna actually be effective in like solving a problem that they might have. And so for us in Mailbox, what we heard a lot was people just felt overwhelmed by their inbox, they felt
Mhm.
controlled by it, even though it seems like a very simple thing, but it was like the number one productivity app in like in everyone's lives, and like everyone felt trapped by it. And we were like, okay, how do we make it easier to manage? Like if people are drowned by their email, like us included, we want to get away from it. We'd rather not
Right.
use it, but we all rely on it to communicate, to collaborate, to get work done. Like, how do we make it better? And so we really started to think about that. And I think that's like another thing that I just enjoy about being a designer is I feel like we have the tools, the mindset to make things better. And so we started to think a lot about, how do we improve it? And for me at the time, I wasn't thinking about product experiences as deeply as I think about them now. And so I was pretty much obsessed with like visual design, and I was just like coming from like graphic world.
That
So
that's
I
the
started with
gateway
like
drug, right?
typography.
Yeah.
You say that
Yeah,
again?
yeah. Oh, yeah. That's the gateway drug. Is it's always like, ooh, I want to get in design because I want to make things look slick. I want like that really
Yeah,
slick interface. And then you start to realize that actually there's steel beams underneath this slick interface. And then you
yeah,
start to get interested. How are those steel beams like latticed together
Like I
to
like I'd love to know, like just riffing off that, like I'd love to know, and I try to ask every single designer this. Who is the first person that taught you about function over form?
Um,
Because I feel like when designers come across that, like everything about the way that they go about their discipline kind of changes. And so
yeah,
for you, if no one's listening, if no one if you guys haven't listened to the first part of this, Darian got his start designing t-shirts, and also making like MySpace web pages, but everything was very visual. So that's why I asked that question, because it's like a paradigm shift when you hear it as a designer for the very first time in your career.
yeah. That's that's a good question. I'm trying hard to think. And there's people who I feel like I like really hammered it home, but I feel like it's just like a combination of all of my experiences. But I feel
Good.
like
Yeah.
the biggest one was like building my own stuff. Um, and so it's not, I guess it's just like my own teaching because like, I always say it's like you got those product dollars, right? And so like, I might have a big vision and like know exactly what I want to do for, any kind of product. And it was really at Nike where I started to tamper with building my own stuff because I was, making good money and, getting good bonuses. I was a very high performer. And so I was like, I'm going to invest in building my own products. And I started to try to build apps. And there's a couple. Um, the one that I went the deepest on was an app called Stack. And so I had this big vision, but not like that, big budget and like time and like, and so that's really, I really learned how to like deal with like constraints and be like, okay,
Yeah.
like we don't have unlimited budget. I don't have unlimited time. How do I like design it in a way that I can really get where I want? But I would say like up into that, I was pretty spoiled. Um, because yeah, I was spoiled honestly because Mailbox was Gentry was the founder, and so he's a design founder, and so um, and then Scott was his co-founder who came from engineering and operations background, and but also was ex Apple, and so also you know thought very highly of design, and so we were definitely a design company, and even engineers thought of themselves as designers and architects of systems, and so we're a design company. I was very spoiled. um and then
Because it
Nike.
sounds like everyone just got it. When you had conversations, there weren't. like these undertones of like why something's important to pursue or why that attention to detail on that rogue feature is worth doing, a
I, s-
certain way. Or like,
I s- I started butting up against it like really at Nike, and that was because it was a pivotal point at Nike, and we spoke about it a bit last time, but the sneakers app was the first app to be built internally at Nike with in-house talent, and so it's the first of Nike kind of building a digital product, excellence within Nike, and that kind of formation was like people like me who was coming from San Francisco early startup and kind of knew that world and of all different kind of flavors of that, right? And so uh I think for me, I kind of had that scrappiness and like move fast and don't break things was the Dropbox. It was like move fast, don't break things. Um and so I
mm,
was coming from that, but I was also coming from like really high design bar and principles. And then I get to Nike and I'm like, okay, Nike is like excellence, the best of the best, and like, the best athletes in the world. And I think of design and engineers as athletes. And like, so I wanted to be at that high level, but there were people who were like, didn't understand that and more like, done is better than perfect. And like, and so I was
right.
coming up against that. And what I've always found is just like, how do we how do we bring people along who may not have those same design values or
Mm.
or that you know appreciation for quality, and how do you bring them along, and how do you show that? And I really learned the art of that at Nike. How do we get people on board? And so I spent a lot
So
of time building decks and storytelling and thinking about,
yeah.
how do I get someone who like may not care about like checkout, and they're like, okay, this is good enough, it works, and blah blah blah. And how do we push to like, no, that's not good, like good is not good enough. And like
So
awesome
you
is the
said
new expectation, right? And like
right.
we had to show that. Um, yeah.
I had a question about the word that you used with excellence because it's something that I think about a lot. Um, and sometimes I wonder, like, when you're talking about bringing people along, how much do you think? How does it look when you're trying to bring someone along who doesn't maybe have that same natural inclination towards design thinking? How does it look when you feel like they just have a competing definition of excellence or one that maybe butts up against your conception of excellence as a designer? And how does that compare to trying to bring someone along who you feel like maybe they don't have a strong definition of excellence at all? Um, and what's the contrast between the two?
Yeah. I'm sorry, you cut out a little bit, but I think I caught most of that. But I think I think it's like really the same process of like how do we get aligned? And I spend a lot of time doing that, now with the clients that I work with is um and when they have, so for instance, I'm working on a product and a project, and you got a marketing team, you got product team, you got an engineering team, you got founder and CEO, and then you have the investors, and that's who actually hired me to help out this team. And so it's a pretty crazy. How do you get alignment across all these different? Like you said, everyone has different goals, initiatives. Similarly at Nike, where I was telling you guys about the story of like, we had to build sneakers using internal technology that already existed. And those product and engineering teams already have roadmaps, already have goals. I think at the time one was like, expanding Nike.com to China and building like, WeChat experience so they can do commerce in China, which is like a billions and billions of dollars. So definitely what I thought was excellent was like, some slick animation and the way that things are gonna load and come in and like it's gonna be like dope. And they're like, but we're like, putting a checkout module in WeChat and we're gonna get $4 billion. And I'm like,
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah,
It's like, or a increase in revenue
no,
in an
like
untapped
yeah,
market, will tell you like if you have constraints, you have a much better product when you go out to design against it. Can you just talk to us a little about like how constraints have played into your experience and your projects and just any notable constraints outside of that one payments team stuff at night.
yeah. And just to finish the thought a little bit on that is what I was trying to get to is we really had to get alignment. And we got alignment through really like the principles. So like even before we showed designs, it's like, okay, what is our goal? What is our purpose? And we had to really paint the picture of like, this is what the consumer experience is. And at that point, it was like Nike puts a link on Twitter, they see a spinner on Nike.com for 15 minutes. We just painted this picture of it was how trash it was and how we can improve. There's an opportunity for improvement. And we got aligned on like, this is the world that we want to create. And they were inspired by that world. And they were inspired by us believing that we can get there but we needed to do it together, and so they ended up getting on board, and we were able to do that. But but working in constraints, I think, yeah, I think like, yeah, the more senior you get, the better you get as at kind of uh like asking the questions and trying to get to them early. um but I do think constraints make, great products, and they also, they're a lot of times it's the story. And I think without them, uh it's really hard to get something that is a sharp enough point to where it's going to be an effective solution. And things become just like, I guess, like bloated could be a word. You get things that you don't really need when it comes to, a design or a product. And so really getting it to its essence is kind of like understanding those constraints and then being able to deliver within them. Um, but I think
how
for startups, it's just time and money. It's like that's the basic way to think about it, is time and money. The more time you have, the more iterations you're going to be able to do, the more you're going to be able to learn, the more you're going to be able to get closer to like solving your customers' problems. And so that's the biggest constraint that I didn't understand before. Like I said, I was kind of spoiled, but I have a
With
deep
lots of
understanding
product
of it
dollars.
now. Yeah. Yeah. And so I bring that to my clients now, where I'm just like, okay, like you might want to think about it this way, because and a lot of times they're not even thinking about time and money. Um, and
Hmm.
so I think I said this before too, but I might talk myself out of projects or out of scope. But because I'm so mindful of that, of like, let's make sure you have the right signal. Let's make sure, this opportunity to test and learn is gonna set you up for the next up at bat, right? Um, so yeah, I don't know if that answered your question, but
Well, I want to push an inch deeper there, because if you're saying that the biggest constraint for startups is time and money, which it totally is, um, that poses a question for the founder without a compass, right? Which is like, well, I already know I only have this much runway left. or I already know that this is all the budget that we have for product development. Um, in that environment, how would you approach, or how do you approach setting the right constraints so that you can
Hmm.
create the solution that's the sharpest possible, that it can actually break through?
Yeah. Um, I try to, develop a pretty deep like strategy that would encompass like, what are our goals? There's always like a goal. And in 2022 in 2020 when we started building uh FastAF, and I think that was um my closest look, working directly with the CEO and kind of understanding um that kind of constraint where, he had just uh pivoted from, dark store, or kind of like discovered that dark store probably not gonna work with the existing model, and wanted to try FastAF, and needed to get to a place where we had some kind of signal pretty quickly. And so we really broke it down in like a 90-day sprint,
Hmm.
and had like a goal of like, okay, we need to launch this app. We need to get customers. I can't remember what the specific goals were, but there, like, I think there was some kind of metric we had around like orders in like 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 initial orders placed, and so that was our goal. And I and people on my team will remember I'm what I would call a ruthless prioritizer. um, Whereas if there was anything that wasn't going to get us to that goal, like we were not doing it, and we just had to put blinders on and just go after what was going to unlock uh, those goals. And so like I think like our first goal was like get orders. And so the first version of the app didn't have things like, a reset password flow,
Oh yeah,
or
yeah.
Yeah.
like things like or like an onboarding, or like there's a lot of things that weren't there where people would like, give me feedback on the app and like, how can I can't reset my password, or how come you don't have this? And I'd be like, yo, you gotta know that I know those things, right? Like, I know how to design an app, clearly. But my first goal is to get freaking customers. And I only
Right.
had, I don't even think it was 90 days to start. I think we started doing 90-day sprints after. I think it was 60 days. So we launched a full functioning native commerce experience, full front end and back of house operations in 60 days, and curated all of the product assortment,
That's crazy.
merchandising, designed the brand, all of that in 60 days. And so it had to be really like, nope, not doing that. Nope, not doing that. And it really comes down to like, I make a lot of lists. And sometimes they're like, we would war room, put everything up on stickies. This is all the stuff we would have to do. And you'd be like, nope, we're not doing that, not doing that, not doing that. And you just keep coming back to it, and you narrow it down. You see where you're at. Um, and so,
What
yeah,
was
it's,
I was
no,
gonna
go ahead.
ask what's your gauge um what is your gauge for deciding, like, as you're designing something, what's your gauge for like, okay, this is actually worth pursuing versus I'm spending too much time on this, it's time to ship. Like, how do you decide like enough's enough in a high octane environment where it's either you ship or you die?
Yeah. Um, it's really like impact. What's the impact gonna be? Um, and there, it's like said differently. It's like, is the juice worth the squeeze, right? And
I
so
like that.
like, and so there's always things that, um, might be nice to have versus like, critical. And you have to be able to think about that. And I think like back to kind of where we started this conversation is being like having a connection to your users, those personas, and kind of being able to have the voice in your head. You can kind of be tapped in a way to where you can kind of better gauge. And if you don't know, just like ask them, right? Or you just kind of get enough information up front to where you can kind of get to the next phase where you kind of have enough insight and you kind of know, right? You kind of know like, okay, people are gonna like love love this thing, or this is gonna like make people sign up, or this is gonna like if we have a problem with um um I don't know, conversion or stickiness, what are decisions that are gonna help you hit that goal, and like
Hmm.
just focus on that. So for instance, again, I could give examples if it's more helpful, but one was like kind of talking back to the FastAF launch. We wanted to get orders, we wanted to get awareness, we wanted to test the model of do people want fast delivery of not just grocery and snacks, but other goods. We had a lot of, assumptions and insight. And, one I brought from Nike, which was a lot of people wanted, or a lot of people did their research online. I learned at Nike. They would look at Nike.com, they would look at YouTube, a lot of websites get information, but then they would go to the mall and purchase because they wanted an instant. And FastAF validated a similar insight. And so during COVID, we're like, okay, do people want to buy Air Force Ones and get them delivered in 2 hours? Do people want to buy, dog leashes? And we had a lot of research that said yes, but we wanted to test that. And so um, we focused on what would enable that. Um, and then there were other goals and things that would kind of help us optimize along the way. So for instance, the first version had very poor like unit economics. Warehouse employees were contractors that were paid a lot. Um, I can give a lot of examples, but like eventually that became a problem. So then we had to solve for that. Um, so yeah, I
This is
think
a
it's like, go ahead, go ahead.
this is a theme that we've noticed as well. It's something that we try to communicate to anyone whose ear we can grab on it. Because kind of like you, kind of like Zane, from Instacart. I mean, like the four of us really have like definitely cut our teeth in the on-demand trenches. I don't know if we mentioned this to you on the first call that when we first got into Y Combinator, it was as an Instacart for Africa. So we
Yeah,
were we were. So when you say that like you launched in 60 days a back office, a slick customer app, a brand system, and a curated assortment of products, we know firsthand how hard that is. That is insane. But like one,
Also, like super impressive.
yeah, super impressive, right? Like, yeah, it's a big deal. Like the thing that we try to tell everyone who will listen is that like design, you think that it stops, and we're trained to think that it stops at Figma. It stops at wireframes or diagrams or component libraries. But you can just as easily design your cache conversion cycles. You can apply, which is actually
absolutely.
something that we, right? That like finance was really, really stressful until we dismantled it into individual parts and said, why is it like this? And we figured out a few changes that, I mean, literally could be like a portfolio piece in like a designer's portfolio with like the
Yeah,
same, the usual sort of like portfolio porn they have of like so we got the sticky notes together and then we created like user personas and flowcharts and stuff. You don't have to just do that for products and apps like what you're saying. You can do it for back of office. You could do it
Yeah.
for a warehouse that includes dog leashes and Air Jordans, right?
yeah,
Those are still design questions because it's like, what's the architecture going to be? What goals are we
yeah.
trying to achieve,
And actually,
right?
that makes me think of like another question, which is like, in what other areas did you find yourself designing within a company?
Yeah. I'm
Outs,
glad
Yeah.
yeah,
I'm glad you said that because, back to what Agree was saying, I think like not only can you do that, I think a lot of times um, you can be a better designer and a more effective designer if you can understand the business and understand operations and really understand what we are talking about, the constraints, right? It's like the space that you're playing around with. And if you have a deep understanding of that, the the better your designs are going to be, the better you can like visually or creatively impact the world. And I learned that with iOS, where I was like, okay, I wanted to learn the HIG. I wanted to learn really deeply how iOS worked in order to be able to design a great app, right? And so like even like you talk about the swipes, that was like Gentry and I talked about a lot. Like what did it mean to be mobile? What did it mean to be natively
yeah.
mobile? And what is the mobile used for? And we're like, it's used for swiping and like all these things. And we're like, okay, so if we're gonna make the modern version of email, then it should probably use gestures because that's the main freaking thing of this technology. And so having a deep understanding of business is going to help. And I can give an example, um, like back to Facebook. So, I mean, Facebook, back to FastAF. We spent a lot of time working on thinking about the packaging. And um, we're going to do boxes just like Amazon. And along the way, got inspired and wanted to do a bag. And so we made this like tote bag, and because we had all these different products from like headphones to leashes to sneakers, and security was an issue, and they were starting to like during COVID. Remember, everyone started putting stickers on food
Uh,
delivery, and I was like, what if the tote bag had a zipper? Like, and that would be dope. And so we designed this fast AF canvas bag that had a zipper, and we like sourced it and everything, and we like did specs for sizes and like what range of products could we hit with these sizes. And again, that V1 launch, like CEO loved it, and it was one of those things that became an instant hit where literally everyone would get a fast AF order and they would take a picture of the bag and post it. We
Boom.
never asked anyone to do it, and it was one of those things where um we just kind of thought it would be cool, and we thought it would elevate the experience and people would appreciate it, and it turned out to be true. Fast forward, now that we've proved the model, we got orders, we got people delighted, they're loving Fast AF, they're spreading the word, they're posting pictures of this bag. Now next phase, we have to scale this. We now have a CFO. This is, fast forward, who's like, Darian, I'm like, we have to figure out, our economics. These bags cost $5
I
each.
was just about to ask, like, yeah, I'm like, there's no way. I thought along the lines of like what Chewy did, which I think which is the first example that comes to mind where they took your standard like 2 gauge boxes, right? Corrugated, and then they added blue ink branding so
Yeah,
that like and now whenever you see a Chewy box like walking the streets of Manhattan, you're like, shit, maybe I should give that a go because you
yeah,
just see it right there, like collapse and stuff. And they're all the time they're massive boxes because their specialty is delivering massive dog food, quantities. But I'm sitting here being like, okay, canvas, zipper, expensive sourcing,
Yeah.
and then he was just talking about impact. How did you understand that that was going to be impactful?
yeah. So kind of to finish the thought really quick, but because like I want to give the example for designers of just like that deeper understanding of the business, and also bringing other people along, right? So like we talked about what excellence looks like for CEO. If it's like, yo, we're gonna unlock series B, if we can show we have amazing unit economics. I need to get these costs per delivery way down. And I'm like, I want this to be an amazing experience that everyone, and not only that, I want a 10 out making things better. I want a 10% improvement on the Amazon experience. Everyone hates the packaging. Everyone hates a box in a box. And like we have this beautiful bag experience. We also had like a brand marketing idea of like, what if we did drop offs in the community and you can like drop off your bag and we recycle. The bag was also made of recycled material. So we had this beautiful, purposeful brand story and experience that's in competition
Series B.
with Series B and our CFO. And so I had to get get it. I had to understand his world. I had to like, okay, what like break down the unit economics, break down. And so we
Yeah.
literally, like we would do a design exercise. What are all the like he walked through like the spreadsheet is crazy. Like first he sent me the numbers in a spreadsheet. Then I'm like, yo, we need to get together and like tell me what each one of these line items are. Like, what does this cost? And he's like, okay, this is the customer acquisition cost. This is the cost of goods. This is the delivery fee that we have to pay our driver. This is the cost for the warehouse workers that fulfill and pack. This is like, I had to understand that. And then I'm like, okay, I started being able to help him creatively problem solve how we can chop those things are. Okay. Cause
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
these are our shared goals. And like, and like back to also what I said, we had to align on principles. Our principles are we care about a 10% increase on the experience from Amazon. We care about that. Our North Star is like being the best way to get a product from point A to point B. We care about that. Okay. Now, then the constraints are like unit costs, right? Scalability, right? And so then I had all this information and I had to go back to the design team to break down these constraints, and they were just like me when I was a visual designer, and I didn't care. Like they
This
don't
is
care. They were,
blasphemy.
yeah, exactly. They were like, "What? Why would we like?"
Yeah,
We're
yeah,
just
yeah.
like people are just starting to learn it. Like, why would we change our ingredients now? People are starting to love it. It makes no sense. And I'm like, hear you. I'm with you. But I also understand this worldview now, right? And so I'm able to connect the dots. And we were able to, go back and figure out like, okay, can we talk to different vendors? how
Right.
does how does buying in bulk affect the cost? How does like not only that, can we have a an alternative packaging solution with other bags and other materials? How could we like based
What
on
you're
order value? How like we had to really
Yeah, yeah.
get creative. But yeah, I just wanted to tell that story to kind of connect the all those dots.
You're also describing kind of how a designer in the right organization inevitably ends up spoiled all over again, right? Because they're the only people who get to bounce around between the different departments and basically almost do like a tree survey of the grain of wood of each of the departments to understand the material they're working with and how to get all these materials sort of aligned together. That like if like an engineer comes up to the CFO and says, "Hey, as part of me doing my job, I need to understand these individual line items." CFO would be like, "What are you doing?" Right? Whereas like if you're like, "Look, these tote bags are causing us to blow up with word of mouth, but you're telling me that they're $5 a pop. Like, let's pop open the hood on this spreadsheet. You explain to me this P&L stuff because like we clearly have like a shared problem on our hands that we got to unpack together."
And you
Right?
know what
Yeah.
else this reminds me of is it's not just it goes way past like physical products or like cogs and stuff. It's actually like there's liability is introduced in the relationship between a designer and an engineer. when you do handoff. And the example that comes to mind is when we were working together, I was shipping a bunch of stuff through Figma and Agree's like, this doesn't work, this doesn't work, this doesn't work. And it was because I was putting like drop shadows here or like wanted an animation here or something there. And I was like, okay, hold on. Can we just take like half an hour to run through the do's and the don'ts of React, like, and what it can do?
You're talking about circa
Yeah.
2017 at
Yeah.
Clara? Or, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So
A
it's
little
still
after
kind of,
as well, but it's
oh
like
yeah,
trying to understand the constraints before you start building. Again, like coming back to this, like there's like principal constraints, there are like, you know, customer constraints, there's like financial constraints, legal constraints, but there's also like engineering interacting with design constraints. Like if the
Absolutely.
program that you're making or like you're making stuff in can't execute on a design that you're making in Figma and it's preventing a launch, well, you need to think about that as a constraint that influences the design language. So that's just what
exactly.
made
Yeah.
me think about
Yeah,
that.
if like a designer and JavaScript are in a disagreement, you know,
Yeah.
JavaScript
Yeah.
usually ends up having to win, right? Um,
Yeah.
Actually, wait, Darian, I want to give like a pretty crazy shout out that like most people just don't know about, of like an example of this like, wait, design can do that? What? Like going beyond the pixel is I'll paint the picture for you. It's 2019. Um, Numi has just sort of started to find its stride as a consumer grocery delivery service for people living in Nairobi. And there's a strong culture in Nairobi of motorcycle deliveries. They call these guys the Boda Boda guys, okay? And so like it's like um my friend Asa Rumin, who's a writer in Nigeria, sort of described like the iPhone in Africa is the motorcycle. Like the $700 motorcycle is as transformative for life there in cities, especially as the iPhone
Yeah.
was for us. Right? That it just brought suddenly everything became hyper connected because you could get like anything on the back of a motorcycle, slide it across the surface of Lagos or Nairobi or Johannesburg in like minutes, right? Okay, a lot of these delivery guys, they have these like boxes, these like tough boxes on the back. They're like made of like what are they like plexiglass, right?
They're fiberglass and
Fiberglass.
they're each like $250. And in Nairobi, that is fucking expensive. Even
Yeah.
here in the States, that's fucking expensive.
Yeah, that's 1/10. Imagine like roughly the equivalent for the United States, adjusting for GDP per capita, it'd be like a $7,000 box to do deliveries in. Okay, so like super pricey. And then get this, Darian, to get a box installed on your bike has to go to the shop and it's out of commission for like a week and a half because it has to get custom like screwed on and stuff.
They have to like tack weld certain like rebar into like your it's I mean it's crazy.
And so like these two guys who clearly we're not from Kenya, right? Like we're not from Nairobi. How is it that like we were able to solve this problem? It was like, well, Harrison had a motorcycle. Harrison bought a motorcycle
Mm.
and like actually went through the process of installing one of these delivery boxes.
I learned how to ride on YouTube.
Yeah, and learned.
Do not recommend.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But he learned that it was like, oh my gosh, it costs this much money to buy one of these boxes. It costs this much to get them installed in this much time, and like we can't like blitz scale or grow as fast as we want to if this is this bottleneck. Harrison
Right.
went and found a local Tupperware manufacturer. Like, you know those Tupperware Rubbermaid tubs, right?
Yeah.
Found a
Yeah.
local manufacturer and he realized that you could get twice the cubic footage capacity for 1/10 the cost and no installation. You just use bungee cords. And this ended up
Yeah.
creating like super U-Hauls on the back of motorcycles.
And now a lot of Boda Bodas do this. And
Yeah.
we'd like to think that it was because of like our contribution, but it just goes to show that like if you have constraints, like a budget in this case, and the other constraint being like variable mounting options, it will produce something. It will produce something that maybe hasn't been thought about before. So yeah, I
Yeah.
really like that example that you gave.
Yeah. And so like
And oh no, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, Darian, like it's like the thing that's so cool about like your experience at like FastAF was basically that like so much of making an on-demand product work is essentially operations design, right? And
Yeah.
it's still at its core design in its essence, right? Even though it's not happening in Figma.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Absolutely. And I encourage more um, designers, especially up and coming designers, to kind of get that understanding and that context of, not what you just said, which is not only just what you just were talking about before, which is like, JavaScript or, Swift or whatever the medium that you're designing for, right? Understand it, understand, those technical constraints, but also opportunities that lie with the understanding. So don't be afraid to kind of dive in and even if it's intimidating, see if you have a coworker or like I did with our CFO that can, walk you through it and break things down so that you can gain that knowledge, because it's going to make your solutions better. Like, and then same, I love the story with Harrison, like rolling your sleeves up, right? And I love that, trying to make the things that we envision. I encourage designers to do. A lot of times, designers are too comfortable with creating the picture of the thing, right?
Right.
Totally.
Like if you
Right.
do a mock-up of a t-shirt, you just made a picture of the t-shirt. You didn't make the t-shirt. Like
Yeah.
try
Yeah.
to make the t-shirt. See if you
Is it
can,
iron
you
on? Is
know,
it silk screen? Is it
yeah, is it an
pressed?
iron
How
on?
much is the
Yeah,
ink? What's the thread count? Is it
Yeah.
labelless?
yeah,
Label like there's so
yeah.
many things.
Did you like
Yeah, where do
dissolve?
you get the blank from? Like, where do you get the blank from? Where do you like, and when you do that, you'll understand, you know, we keep using the word, those constraints, but also and I spoke about it before. I learned so much from that. I learned so much from, not just making the picture of the t-shirt or the bag or the hat, but like actually going out there and trying to make it. You learn so much, and I bet
Yeah.
you learned
Oh,
so much by trying to build that box, right? Not only did you learn how to install it, you learned how much the parts cost, how much time it takes to build one, and now that helped inform your design. And so I encourage designers to not only go deeper and understand all aspects of, what they're painting pictures for, like literally and figuratively. um, but don't be afraid to get your hands dirty. I even with like whether it's a physical thing or it's a digital product, I'll try to make it even from engineering perspective. And I may not, be able to do the final thing, but just trying to like hack it together on my own, I can have a more productive conversation with an engineer because I know what's possible,
Right.
or or even if I can just like speak the same language, right? So like even like now I don't know Python, but I want to be able to speak some of the same language. So when I'm collaborating, we have a common ground. And not only is that effective in the end product, but it's also effective in what I was talking about earlier, the important part of bringing people along, right? Bringing people along with your design process. If you can speak their language, they're going to respect you that much more, right? And I had a lot of engineers be willing to work with me and understand where I was coming from because I had did my homework and I understood where they were coming from. I understand what they were up against. Like, hey, I know this might be freaking hard and like because of XYZ and like you have to work around this thing to do that. But if we do it, like this user's gonna love it because of this, and like it's gonna set us up for this, and our brand's gonna be looked at like this, and like blah blah blah. And they're
so
like,
what was
oh,
the end result? Did you guys like work backwards to like find a different manufacturer or like lesser grade materials, but still a zip bag or what was the final output?
There was a lot of different things. It was a battle that I fought a couple of times. I think like one of the first ones, like my like when I understood how they're breaking down the numbers, it was a pretty slick. So my slick solution was, hey, this should be a part of the customer acquisition cost. Shouldn't actually be a part of the unit
This is
economics and
part of it.
delivery costs. This is brand, it's customer acquisition. And so I was able to kick it down the road a couple of times.
So,
um,
what advice would you have for founders that are trying to inspire that type of culture where, because it's not just designers, right? I think like everyone getting involved in everyone's business, more or less, like trying to understand everyone's roles. It just, wow, I feel like I'm about to be in the 90s introducing this word, but it helps synergy, right? It
yeah,
helps like bring
absolutely.
everyone together.
Yeah. I think it's like so um for FastAF we essentially had like a steering team.
No, you're here. Did it cut
Oh,
out?
but
Yeah.
you cut out. You're froze
Oh,
for me. I don't know if
okay.
it's me or you. I'm sorry.
No, you're good. We hear you just
Um
fine.
okay, I'll just keep talking. No, I think it's important to have a culture where, one, you can bring people together from different um parts of the company because they're always going to be a different perspective. And so for us at FastAF, we had, like the leadership team who was essentially the steering committee. And we would come in and we would not only like align at a high level on our goals and what we were trying to do and get done and why, but we would also align on kind of like the activity going on underneath those goals. And we had a very open space where we acted as a true team, meaning not only if you may not be directly responsible for it or the decision maker, but you still had a voice, you still had an input. And we try to create a space that had some psychological safety. And I think I've really learned the importance of that at FastAF, and especially when there was a breakdown in that. But so my kind of shouts for founders would be: one, how can you create a space that has that psychological safety where people are open to share input, even if outside of what they're responsible for, right?
Yeah.
Um, and then two, I think for everyone being able to, or especially leaders, it's important to make decisions from the broadest perspective and context as possible. And what I mean is like, at the time, um, the operations at FastAF was under our CFO. And so he could have easily made a decision that, hey, we're getting cheaper bags. I'm going to reduce the cost by 80%, and I'm going to Uline and I'm ordering paper bags and boxes. And if you want, you can put stickers on them. But this is what I'm doing. But instead, he said, Darian, you saw my goals that I shared. This is our goal to get this down, and you kind of play a big part of it because it was your vision to do these bags, and how can we work together to solve it? And
Yeah.
he didn't have to do that, but because of the type of team culture that we had and we all felt like we could work together to reach our goals together, and we had an alignment on like these principles, he came to me and we were able to kind of work through it. And so that would be my biggest thing for founders: building up that culture and empowering your teams to make decisions when they have the most context. And that was one thing that we really championed, and our CEO made that pretty clear. It was like, okay, it's your decision, but I recommend you talk to X, Y, and Z. Um, and then you as a leader can take that, you can walk in a room and be like, so that it's not, it's not any confusion. Hey, I'm responsible for X and I need to make a decision on X. So this isn't a committee. However, I would love your input and perspective on what you think and what you're seeing and how do you think this will affect this and all of that. And you're like, cool, I hear you. I'm gonna process this and I'll make my decision. Right.
Hmm.
And like the more teams do that, you're getting that input. I think a lot of times people are kind of running teams based on like power and control, um, but not like collaboration and synergy, like you said.
It's funny because we were chatting with Casey Climbs, and he also talked about the power dynamics so he's a UX researcher. And for anyone interested, go ahead, check out that. It's basically the UX researcher behind Live Maps, like the AR version. So it's
Oh
pretty
On
yeah.
cool.
Google Maps,
Yeah.
yeah.
And he talks about um, he talks about the the power politics of when his role comes in as the UX researcher. He's not party to anyone, right? Like he's not on anyone's side but the data and what the information is saying. And he said though that before he even starts anything, he tries to understand like how do people internally get promoted? How like where does everyone's incentives align? Like what are everyone's motivations? And so he'll
I love that.
he'll make like bespoke recommendations based off of how that person may react or like take in that information. And I think the
Smart.
same thing applies for designers and marketers and lawyers, basically everyone in an org, understanding everyone's motivations and where they're coming from and how they perceive the world. Like
Yeah,
you'll make for such a more capable designer and founder if you understand those tenets. And
absolutely.
also another thing that he brought up that we could talk about some other time, but like emergent technologies, kind of going back to like I wanted to bring this up before, but we kind of went somewhere else, which is fine. But like you were talking about like the phone is gesture based and it's an emergent technology and leaning into that technology with good product design. So in your case, the emergent technology inspired the swipe and it completely flipped the paradigm of like tap to click or tap to delete or something. And yeah. So that's those are the 2 cents I want to say.
Just real quick, I want to touch on one thing you said because I love that you mentioned it, and it's one thing that working in a corporate world I've started to really live by, and that's like sharing what you said about those agendas, and I think it's really important for people to share their intent, and it's one thing that
Yeah.
I've learned to do, and because I've and you can feel it, right? Like when, especially if you've been in a big org in a big corporation, you can feel when there's people in a room and they have an agenda. And it,
Yeah.
and it might be, just to do this thing and get a promotion or impress their boss or all of those different like things. And I always say there's nothing wrong with having an agenda, but the problem is when you try to like hide it and be like fake and like you don't have to be like a snake or like a weasel about it. Just like be genuine. Like there's
Yeah.
nothing wrong with being ambitious or having an agenda.
It's like
Like
that big short character that goes to Morgan Stanley.
Oh yeah, but if I
yeah,
He's like,
yeah.
I'm in it for the fucking money.
yeah,
Like, do we want conversation or not? And like,
Yeah.
well, this is
I've also noticed for sure is like with in big companies, a lot of the times the executives will be way more forward about what their agenda is than the people who report to them. Because like for the executives, they're like, look, we got pressure from our board. We got to deliver these results. They won't get off my case. Will you help or will you not help? Like, get us there. Whereas sometimes like with the people who report to them or the people below that, they sometimes might feel like anything new that you're trying to do might step on their turf, and they don't feel as comfortable maybe like vocalizing what exactly their turf is and why their turf is important to them.
Hmm.
Which is like it's nuanced, but it can turn into like antimatter, where you're like you think that the path in front of you is very clear, but then you're pushing up against it,
Hmm.
right? And you're
Yeah,
like, why am I blocked? It seems like it's right there, but there's something like stopping me from moving forward.
yeah, it's true. It happens a lot. It happens a lot. And I feel like, especially cross-functionally, um, it causes so much friction. And then you, exactly what you just said, there'll be a blockage. Things won't be moving for one reason, but oftentimes it's just like a breakdown in communication. Um, and like that causes the misalignment. And so I try to encourage people and anybody that listens, you know, be open as much as you can and don't be I think also I think at the root of it is like there's like this like fear. And
Yeah.
so I've always coached people on my team to kind of get rid of that fear. Because I'm always like fearless. um and that's really because I ultimately believe that I'm doing what's right for the business, the brand, the consumer. And so I'm always like, yo, if I get fired for that, I don't care, right? I'm gonna like stand on these principles and like I'm able to like do that. And like part of my intent that I have shared is like, yo, this isn't a portfolio piece for me. Like I don't care about that, right? Like I want this is why I want it to be great, or this is why you're gonna keep hearing me talk about this.
It's so counterintuitive to like put yourself in a place where you're uncomfortable. But I remember like when we were in San Francisco, I always remembered the real OGs of the company. They did whatever they want, and not in like, this like very like disrespectful way, like I'm the shit. But they would come to the table and they would be like, uh, I'm gonna work 9 to 5 and I'm gonna get all my work done, and I want you to all respect my space, but like when it's crunch time, I'll stay, a few hours extra. I'll put in the work.
Yeah.
Also, I'll let you know when I'm about to leave this job because the work becomes boring. I want to let you know that like this feature is very cool and I'm willing to leave the company if it doesn't get shipped because that's how much I believe. And it's like, holy cow, like it is so scary to put yourself in a position where you have that conviction. But at the same time, it's exactly that conviction that make great products, that make great designers, that make great founders. And I think like to anyone listening, just have conviction in what you believe in. I
Yeah.
think that like that's more or less like what you're trying to say here.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And even if you're just starting out, you got to have it too. And it may be scary, job security and this economy is definitely serious, but that could also be a part of your communication, right? And your intent, right? Hey, my intent is not to be disrespectful. My intent is not to do like being vulnerable in that way, I think garners a lot of respect and it'll have people looking at you in a whole nother light. And I think it's like one of the greatest leadership qualities that you could have, right? And like, so not only is the product and design, all that stuff going to be better, but the overall company and culture is going to be better if everyone can kind of show up in an authentic way to where they feel comfortable doing that, even when it's scary. It's when you like got something.
That's when
So
the
Um,
magic happens.
who do you
yeah.
think, yeah, in a misaligned environment, who do you think is responsible for bringing everything into alignment?
It's the
Uh,
intern.
ult-
Yeah.
Who?
ultimately, I think the CEO. I think the CEO ultimately. Um, but I also think like we had a principal at FastAF was like, be, I forget exactly how we worded it, but it was something around be the CEO of your own something. I forgot how we worded it.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
like, not to say like, everyone's a CEO, but like if you're a designer, you're CEO of, it could be a junior designer. You're the CEO of the UI kit. You're the CEO of, and so everyone's leaders. Um, and so anyone can recognize when things are, inefficient or there's problems or, things are gonna go bad. You're not gonna win, and so anyone should kind of speak up. But like ultimately, I think it's like the CEO, and like you should, as a CEO, you kind of have to be the one to recognize when you're not running a well-oiled machine, when things are just like broken. And if you're not able to do that, then you're not connected with your team enough. You're not tapped in enough. You don't know, you don't understand your business well enough. And even for me, being at FastAF and being a co-founder, we went through a couple of different stages. We went through, kind of like starting out when it was just like me and the founder and CEO, and it was just like us, and everyone felt like underneath us. And I had half the org and he had half the org. And then that moved to, we went through growth and we had a big C-suite, um, and a CMO, a CFO, and CTO, and some really big heads. And even when we went to that, I stayed very close to not only those other chief executives, but also layers underneath in their team, and connected with my team, and so I had a very, very detailed view of what was going on across the company that would enable me to affect my decision making and strategies, and also like problems, right? That we had to solve, or breakdowns in processes, or whatever. And similarly to Nike, and so if there's another, try to give all the gems that I can to make this valuable for people if they want to watch, but it would be just like building relationships, right? Which is also kind of counterintuitive because that takes time. But I would say prioritize those relationships because it also is a part of the work, right? And so I used to have a lot of one-on-ones, a lot of one-on-ones, with this person, with that person, with the marketing associate, with the head of partnerships, the head of sales, head of like my team one-on-ones, weeklies, bi-weeklies, like all the way down, even if whether they reported to me or not. Um, and all the leadership um, roles that I've had, and other leaders would look at me and be like, "Why are you meeting with them? They don't report to you."
Hmm.
Um, but they're in my org, right? And like I'm gonna gain something from talking to them. They're like levels down from me, quote unquote, but like that perspective is just as valuable as like this one, right? Maybe more valuable. And so
Talking to that t-shirt maker or talking to the person at the warehouse. Like
yeah,
there's so many different roles that um a company, it's within their sphere. Like maybe they're on payroll by the company and like maybe the core team's not talking to them, but it's actually to that core team's benefit to go outside of that core and talk to the users that are both internal users and external users so that they can inform the product work that you do, or they can inform the product that like all these other parts of the core are doing.
yep, absolutely, absolutely. there's no task too small for a leader,
Yeah,
and
exactly.
that's somebody's quote. But I think it's an important one. I think a lot of, um, especially, I see it a lot in the design community where, it's just like pretentious and like, oh, I'm not gonna do that. I don't do that. I don't. You got to shake that off, because there's everything. If you believe that every detail matters, and you can't believe that and think that there's a task too small for you. Like they're literally conflicting, right? And so like, um, you have to be able to get in the weeds of things. You have to be able to dig deeper and just have that understanding. So yeah,
I
and
love that.
also I think like to the building relationships point, it makes all of the other things that we've been talking about easier, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Getting that
Yeah.
knowledge, getting that buy-in, getting like if I and I've learned, I can be pretty passionate, right? And to people that don't know me, I'm like, dang, this dude is like, whoa. But for the people that know me and who I've built a relationship with, it's nothing, right?
Yeah.
It's not, it's literally nothing, right? And so, it's so important to build those relationships.
So, Darian, like rounding this out, what is the one thing that you wish you had spent more time thinking about, talking about like those 2 steps ago, right? Or 2 steps back, like 10 years ago? What is one thing that you wish you had spent more time thinking about now that you look back on it?
Wow, that's a good
Tell us
question.
about your regrets, Darian.
Oh, wow. That's a good one. Um, I don't know. I guess I guess it's I guess it's really like, what do I truly want? Um, I think it's taken me some growth and maturity, and I'm still working on it. Because it's easy to do what you're good at. It's easy to do what's expected of you. Um, it's easy to be broad when it comes to the things that we want, is what I'm talking about. And I hear when I talk about, or when I talk to, designers that I mentor, and they might be like, I want to get a startup job. Well,
Okay.
that's very broad, right? Like, and so being very clear and detailed about what you want, I think is important. Um, and it takes some time to kind of unpack and kind of get there, right? And I find myself doing it, still where, I'm a runner now. I go for a lot of walks and a lot of runs, and now I have the growth and maturity to. And I joke with my wife where I might be like, "That's gonna take a couple walks." Because like I don't know, right? Or like I may know at a like vague level.
I'm gonna
Um,
use
Yeah.
and so I have to unpack things with myself, and I wish I would have done that more, or I wish I would have had that, like maturity to do it back then, to be able to get really specific with what I want, um, and what's gonna be fulfilling, um, yeah, I think that's it.
that's a good answer.
Yeah, words worth their weight in gold.
Yeah.
Well, thank you
Yeah.
so much for coming on for part two, Darian.
Yeah, no problem, no problem. This is fun. I enjoy chatting with you guys, and I hope someone can get something from it. So anytime,
Oh yeah.
They
We
definitely will.
it's starting with us. We got so
Yeah.
we yeah. This is awesome. Thank you so much.
no problem.
Okay, so don't leave yet.
Yeah.
We